far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha, everyone. This is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you.
Road's gone far away from home, and we've been lonely, miss you only when we are away. A sunny day is not quite the same as the ocean blue. At home in the islands, at home in the islands, at home. We're two happy guys, neath tropic skies, living the life of the gypsy musician, and it's hard on our heads, and the lady of our hearts is miles and miles and miles away. At home in the islands, at home in the islands, at home.
Hey, aloha, everyone, and thanks for stopping by to hear another life story. Now, today, my guest will be Beth Pellino-Dudzic, who spent 18 years living on Oahu, and she likes the Brothers Casimiro, and that's who just performed Home in the Islands. Now, mid-podcast, we're going to hear from, well, what I think is another individual that Beth will know, and that's Henry Kapono, and he's going to perform Namakua. Now, if you want to hear my interview with Henry, we talked story back in November of 2021. And as always, hey, please support the musicians you hear on the podcast. These guys work really hard. They want to continue to be able to do their musical pursuits. I mean, it's a passion for them. They love it. And unfortunately, outside of Hawaii or possibly the West Coast, a lot of these artists aren't very well known. So please remember to purchase their music. Now, as I prepared for this episode and familiarized myself with Beth's story, I realized very quickly that besides Hawaii, we both have a lot of love for music. So I'm pretty sure that as Beth relates her story today, that just might come up. Hey, Beth, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Thank you, Larry. It's my pleasure. I love doing podcasts, and I love talking about music and talk story about Hawaii. You spend 18 years there. You're kind of drenched into the culture there.
Oh, for sure. When I interview people, I'd say this is, I think, interview number like 140 or something. And probably half the people have been. Those who have been kind of understand that allure. It's that aloha spirit. It's the, if you get into the culture, it's the music and it's the foods and it's of course, the beautiful weather and different things like that. But then there's the other side, right? It's the expense and it's you're on an island and you're isolated. And so,
that's the part for 18 years, which was my bane of existence, because I'm a New York City girl, right? I'm from the suburbs of New York. To be taken away from that culture was really hard. Because when you meet people from Hawaii, especially people who have been ingrained there, they know people forever. And no matter how long you live there, for me, I just never I felt accepted, but it was hard to break that culture that these people and their families have been institutions in certain things. It's hard to break into that social circle. I did, obviously, and my three daughters were born there, so that automatically gave me an in. My daughters were born there, so and I was very active in Honolulu, being a room mother, and my ex-husband was very well known, and I used to throw the best parties in Honolulu, and people wanted to come. It was a beautiful life until it wasn't. I said, I'm on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and I really wanted to go back to New York, and that was my thing. Hawaii is beautiful. Been to every island a million times, and yes, and I actually went back a year and a half ago because my daughter wanted to get married there. I said when I left, I'm not coming back here for 10 years. It was well over 25 years. And I thought I would be triggered, but I went back there and it was like, let's go to Waiola's Chevice. Let's go do this. Let's go to Ala Moana. I felt like I was at home. The difference was I could leave. So I did enjoy my trip there.
Yeah. Like I say, it's different for everyone, and your experience is unique, just like your life story. I think if you're ready, let's get into your life story. Maybe talk about where you did grow up. You said New York, but I mean, I know a little bit again because I studied your notes, so I know you spent a little time in Florida. So let's start with growing up and just maybe you can say what you want about your folks. I know a little bit about them, so if you want to talk about that, remember
Oh,
sometimes you don't
sure.
talk about certain things, right? So
Well, my father's gone for 10 years, so I was born in the Bronx, and I had teenage parents. My mother was 17, my father was 19. So I knew right away when I got to be a little bit cognitive, which I can remember from 3 and 4 years old. And they say you have an old soul, and I believe I do have an old soul because I can remember things way back. I knew my parents were different because they were young. So I grew up with the music of that time, all those wonderful 60s female singers. And my father was totally into doo-wop music. As we got older, three, I had three younger brothers. My brother closest to me passed from Alzheimer's. I was the only girl, I was the oldest, and I had three brothers. Got into sports, but I was born in the Bronx, and my maternal grandmother and grandfather, we were always at their house. And my grandmother she was one of five sisters, so my great aunts were like my aunts.
and
It
they were
was,
Jewish, right?
yes, thank you. They
Yeah.
were. Family was very, very important, and we had a wonderfully big extended family. And my second cousins are more like my first cousins. It was just wonderful. They would have these family get-togethers, and there had to be 50 plus people there, and that was strictly just family. So it was wonderful. I remember, and this is something that is old school New York. My grandmother would go to what was called the Avenue, where all the stores were. Back then, there was like a cheese store, a bakery store, a kosher butcher store, the supermarket. And we would go down the avenue as kids, my brother and I. Everybody knew that we were my mother's kids because my mother was scandalous at 17. Not only was she married, it was an Italian guy. So double, scarlet letter from my mom. Everybody would say, "Oh, are these best kids?" We would get fed. We'd go to the bakery, we'd get a cookie. We go to the cheese store, we would get this. We would go past the Hebrew National Store, we would get a hot dog. Like we were fed, just walking down the street with my grandmother. It was a wonderful experience. And the old fashioned, I don't know if you can relate to it. They would be like, you can buy the newspapers and they had candy and they made egg creams, which is a very New York thing. But back then they served them in a paper cone in a cup holder. Those are the wonderful things that I remember. My grandparents were just so much a part of both my brother and my life. And then we moved to Yorktown Heights, which is Westchester County, and Westchester is right above the Bronx. We're basically the city, but we're the suburbs. But my parents decided to move to the upper part of Westchester, so everybody was like, "Oh, we live upstate." Now you go there, it's nothing like when I lived there. And I had a wonderful childhood. I mean, it was everything. You ride your bikes and you came home when it got dark. And during the winter, there was a pond to go ice skating and sleigh riding. And you didn't come home until, you couldn't feel anything. It really was wonderful. I loved going, school was great. The one thing that I still say to my mother, Daddy was wrong in doing this. In middle school, we went to Florida for 2 years when Disney had opened. Him and my aunt started, limousine kind of car deal. He took me away from everything that was the most beautiful childhood that you could have. No resentment, but now that I think about it, it's like, why did you do that? Like, we only stayed there for 2 years. In those 2 years, Larry, I will say that I was a young teenager at the time, and I did learn about, and it's probably a good thing we did move, because two things I did learn. I learned about marijuana, and I learned about sex. And so I think for me, when my parents said, we're going back to New York, it was probably a good thing. I could have gotten myself in trouble. I did not. And when we moved back to New York, we lived in Yonkers, which is upper Westchester, lower Westchester. You go down the street and you're in the Bronx. High school was great. It was just like a crazy time. You could smoke cigarettes in the school and they'd be like, people were lighting up joints and can you walk outside? There was no like, okay, you're going for detention this was what the students were doing at that time. It was fun. We used to go to a lot of concerts. We would take either the train or the subway and the bus, go down to Manhattan, and you name the band, and I saw them. I would say I was right 15, 16. And of course, as I got older, then I started getting into being part of the band club scene that happened in New York. The one thing that having three brothers did for me is I'm a huge sports fan. My family revolved around my brothers playing sports, and I was kind of like, you could come, you not come. So I was kind of left to do my own thing, but I enjoyed seeing my brothers play football and lacrosse, and it was just a nice, very familial kind of thing. My grandfather, would do the seven fishes at Christmas Eve. And then we would go to my father's cousins, and they were loud Italians. And, it was, I think I grew up with two of the best ethnicities a person could have. And because of that, it's me. I'm very demonstrative. I use my hands a lot when I talk. So I am grateful that my family chose to stay in New York and didn't migrate to someplace else. And I live in Alabama now and lived in Hawaii and lived in Florida. But as a New Yorker, when you're born there and raised there, it never leaves you. And when I go back there, because I have one daughter who lives there, it's like it all comes back to me. And it's like the swagger, the way that you talk to people. It's a vibe and it doesn't leave you. And I am proud of that. I think it's a great thing to have now, especially getting into everything that I'm getting into also kind of helps.
And that was a good, little 5, 10 minute kind of synopsis of your growing up, probably to out of high school age, and I can relate to a lot of it. Certainly the bands you were seeing when you were 15, 16, 17 years old, I'm sure were the same bands I was seeing. Everybody from
Hmm.
Grand Funk Railroad to, Bob Seger to Blue Oyster Cult, Ted Nugent, all these different people that were just big parts of my life too, growing up, because I was big into music. I've been to about 180 concerts, so I've
I
seen
have
pretty much everybody I wanted to see. Let's put it that way.
well, I there are some bands I haven't seen, but ticket prices now are ridiculous. They used to have in Woolman Skating Rink in Central Park, they would have concerts, and I saw Todd Rundgren there. I saw Aerosmith there. God, I can't even think of the bands. And it was $5 for general admission, and you waited online, and then you ran once they opened the gate, you ran in. But my aunt had a friend who was a New York City cop. He would be there. So I would go up to him and I would say, Harvey, and he would be like, yeah, just go in, just go in. So there are concerts I didn't even pay for. It was great. They were great concerts. I saw Peter Gabriel there. I took one of my brothers to his first concert. So yeah, I mean, I saw The Who with Keith Moon. So that's a big distinction with Keith Moon. And I do have a funny story about him. Saw the Stones back in the day, and then I saw the Stones in Hawaii. I went with my girlfriend and they're still performing. I mean, I got to give it to them. But I remember saying, I kind of feel like maybe we should not have come to. I like to remember the Stones back in the day than kind of watch this.
Right.
But it wasn't bad. It was just different. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah, I gotta say, my cousin last year we went and saw Jethro Tull,
oh
and
my God, I was just going to talk about Jethro Tull.
we'd seen Jethro Tull 3 times back in the '70s, and
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
we just saw him last year. And Ian Anderson is just crotchety and just
Yeah.
like, hey, I can smell somebody smoking. No smoking. I have lung problems, and no cameras, no video. You can take pictures on the last song, but other than that, no. I mean, it was just get
Really?
off
He
my
was that?
lawn.
Oh, wow. Because I was just going to tell you that I must have seen Jethro Tull 5 times.
Hmm.
I remember going to New Haven, Connecticut, which was about an hour and a half away. And it's like, oh, now we're going to see, we just saw them and we're going to go to Connecticut and see them. And I think we went to Philly to see them. And it was like, yeah, 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 Jethro Tull. And yeah, I would have never gotten that vibe from him, that he would be that way. But sometimes, you say to yourself, and a lot of bands are making resurgence, and even bands from not way back in the day. I mean, The Who has lost 2 members, so they're working with other people. So basically, it's Townsend and Daltrey, you know that. And Zeppelin, I don't think Jimmy Page and Robert Plant like each other enough to actually do it.
Right.
But there are other bands that are more 90s bands that I notice, like Creed, and there's a couple of other bands from that era that were hot and then kind of rode the wave and maybe they tried to do their own thing. But now they're all forming back together because touring is where these guys make money.
Oh yeah, big time.
Um,
And when people tour, then people will go back out and buy your CDs or albums are now downloads, right? But they can still make music and they're promoting themselves. But yeah, they make a lot off the tours and the merchandise and all the different things go along with it.
I did a lot of research, and my marketing guru said, let's put out a newsletter. And I said, well, I can talk about bands who are in concert, and then I have a couple of sites where I read up. And it actually said that even though these guys write music and, they have the royalties from the songs, whatever, they don't make that much money on that. the money on the touring. So that's why they constantly are touring, because that's where they make the big money. Look at Taylor Swift. She just did this worldwide tour. The girl's worth $2 billion. I mean, good for her,
Hmm.
but her ticket prices are outrageous. And what I want to know, because when I get these little snippets of bands who I would love to see. And then when I look at the ticket prices all the way up, it's $125. And I'm not going to spend $125 to sit at the top level. I want to be, and first of all, I'm not that girl. I'm the backstage girl. It's like, give me the backstage pass. Come on. I'm kind of used to that. And so I don't want to spend $400 or $500 for a meet and greet because I'm not a fangirl. And there's a big distinction, right? Fangirls are adoring and whatever. And I look at myself at this point, and even in my younger years, I would get backstage passes. It's like, okay, you do what you do. And I'm an artist too. I'm an author. I write songs. Maybe one day I'll get the voice to where it should be. So I don't look at them as gods. I look at them as like you and I are talking. And sometimes I have met people who I wouldn't say idolize, but I thought were, wow, they are great. And when I met them in person, they were not very nice. So it's sort of like don't meet people who you really like, because you might find out that they're not the person you thought they were.
Yeah, I've said that many times. I've been fortunate because of where I've lived and some of the things that I've done and the career path I chose, which was broadcasting. So I've met so many people from, Charles Barkley to Oprah to I mean, just, and I will tell you this, most of the people I have met have been very nice. And I should say that one of the reasons we're talking so much about music is because, and we're going to get to it in a minute, is because of
Yeah.
what you're doing in your life right now, which I think is pretty cool. But, I have to say, when you were talking about the ticket prices, of all the concerts I've been to, I have about 70% of my ticket stubs still. And if you
Mm.
look at them like Elton John, $7.50,
It's-
Led Zeppelin, $5,
Yes.
you know, and I just went and saw the Red Hot Chili Peppers last year,
Oh,
and we
oh,
sat way up high. And by the
yeah.
time we paid for parking and paid for the tickets and paid,
Yes.
my buddy and I, we spent like $280 a piece,
Yeah.
and we could hardly see the stage.
Yeah, I saw them. I took one of my daughters to see Red Hot Chili Peppers, and my youngest daughter, still to this day, because she was like 10, and I took my oldest daughter, and it was Red Hot Chili Peppers and STP. But we had great seats. It was a very medium-sized venue. Really, everybody had good seats. Yeah, they're fantastic in concert. I would love to go see them again. But again, the ticket prices are ridiculous. Hey, I'll go see some of the older stuff, but there's new music out and new bands that I like, and some that aren't necessarily that new. And they're going on tour. The big thing now is the festivals where they'll have like six people that you want to go see. You know you're going to walk in and it's going to be like $200 to get into the festival because you're seeing like five bands.
Hmm.
What I'm going to try to do is pick a couple of festivals, and there is one in Alabama, and try to get a booth, sell my book, kind of make some t-shirts. I was always, when I did a bunch of podcasts, they said, you're the rock star girl. Like you're out there. You're that rocker girl. You're the rock star girl. And so I said, oh, great. That's a great label. I'm going to use it. So I said to my girlfriend, we can sell the books. We can sell some merch as long as, they let us in. With the festivals, you have to agree to be there for the 3 days because it's a 3-day deal. And I said, if we do get a booth, I said, we're angling. And this is how far and kind of ballsy I am at this point. It's like, we get booths, we're going to pay them money. I want backstage passes. And here's the thing, people are like, oh my God, backstage passes. It doesn't cost the band any money. It's just like you're just allowed to go to a place that's backstage. It doesn't cost the band any money. Now, they sell these VIP packages for like $500. You have a little special access, and then some bands will do the stupid meet and greets, and it's like, well, I don't want to meet you that way. I want to meet you as an artist, as an author, and somebody who knows music, and I don't want to do a stupid meet and greet and pay $500. It's silly. Once you've been in that circle, it's kind of like, wait, what? I'm going to pay you $500 so I can walk by you and say, oh, hey, man, I really like your music. No, I'm not going to do that. I want to talk to you person to person. I am impressed about Charles Barkley because I do like Charles Barkley, and I'm glad to hear that he's what you see on TV is the way he is, and I get it. I like him. I'm happy to hear that he's a good guy.
Yeah, I spent an hour and a half with him one time watching a fight in Vegas, and in that time he was playing for the Phoenix Suns, and I lived in Phoenix, and so I had moved from Las Vegas, and I drove up to the fight, and then I was assigned to stay with him, so I just sat right next to him for an hour and a half, and at the end of the night, he's like, "Hey, Larry, do you come to the Suns games?" And I go, "Oh, we can never get tickets because it's always sold out." And he goes, "All right, hold on." And he wrote down this guy's name. He goes, "You call him, he'll hook you up." And so my wife and I ended up sitting next to Barkley's wife. We had great seats. It was a lot of fun. But he was such a great guy because one of the things I was told was keep people away from him so he can enjoy the fights. And
Yeah.
every person that came up to him, every person, he signed whatever they had. He stood up and took selfies with them. He didn't turn one person down. And that year he won the MVP. That was 1993. So that's my Charles Barkley story. So I don't care what people say. If somebody wants to say something bad about him, all I
I
know is
like
my
him.
experience, and he was a great guy.
I like him. I every time I see him on TV, I'm like, "You go, Charles." I dig you. I do. I like him a lot.
Yeah, and he's from Alabama. He's from Leeds.
Yeah, well, we actually, do have a lot of people from like this concert that this festival. The headliner for the first night is Hank Williams Jr., and that's because he's from Alabama. I mean, they have his, little museum there.
Hmm.
And then the second night, it's Kid Rock, and Kid Rock has he has a lot of land down in what we call LA, Lower Alabama, because LA is different than where I live. So he has a big estate there. So he's the second night, and the third night is Nickelback. They played here last year, and I was trying to get to see them. But then again, like I looked at the ticket prices, and it's like, dudes, I like you, but I want to hook in. At that time, my books were not out. So I said, at this point, I'm a nobody. I have to start to cultivate those connections with people because in my books, there's a lot of me in my books. I will say that the female character has a lot of my characteristics. Certain things she said, I have said. Certain things she does in the books, I have done. The whole thing, and we were talking about family. She comes from a very well connected family. I'm talking mega connected. But as a young girl, at like 4 or 5, I always knew my father had his job, but he did something else, and as a little kid, you're not quite sure, but you're like, oh, okay, there's something else. As you get older, you start to get the gist, but you never talk about it. It's something that's never talked about. Although my father always would say to me, if some guy gets out of line, you let me know. So, with the fact that you don't talk about it, I always knew that no matter what situation I got in, my father could get me out. And it was like that until he passed away. And he would always tell my daughters, if anybody bothers you, you come, you come to me, you come to me. And they kind of knew it too. So when he passed, I really felt, even though my mother is alive and kicking, she's like a bull. I felt a little bit like an orphan because I don't know if it's a girl thing with their father, but I always knew that no matter what happened in life, that my father would take care of it.
Hmm.
And so when that goes away, it leaves a little void. It does.
Sure.
But yes, I grew up knowing certain things and knowing that you never talk about it. It's just there in your life. And that is in my book.
Okay, so that's a good segue. Let's talk about your books because that's a big part of what you're doing now. So we talked about kind of your life up through growing up, 18 years in Hawaii, moving back. You have become a writer and not just a writer of a book. I mean, I wrote a book like 7 or 8 years ago, one book, but you have now written I think you've written five, and this is a series, right? So you read the
Yes.
first one, then you read number two, and then you read number three, and they
Yes.
just kind of keep following, almost like a mini series on TV.
Well, that's what I'm striving for. I will say that. Yeah, I'm working on book 6. Book 5, I know And I'm self-published, so that's a big thing because the self-publishing industry, there's a lot of bad people who will just take your money and your book goes nowhere. I found my people by research. The woman who's my publishing consultant, I interviewed editors, I interviewed marketing people. So I did get a great team, and three of those people have worked together on other projects. So I have an excellent team. My editor, when she got the first draft, she said, Beth, this is two books. This is not one book. And I said, oh, okay. I said, but we need to leave it with a cliffhanger. Every book's going to have a cliffhanger. So, of course, I'm going to do that because I want you to buy the next book. But the story legitimately has been in my head for over 20 years. I do have three other stories, two that I want to write, but I keep saying, not yet, not yet, because when I thought I wrote one book, it was two books. So my editor did the two books, and after the second book, she said, "Keep writing, keep going with the story." That was very easy for me. It was just like, "Oh, okay, well, we're picking up here," and it flowed. Like the story just through the years, it was these snippets, kind of black and white. Like this is what I'm thinking about this. This is what I'm thinking about this. Boom, boom, boom. Being that I was a stay-at-home mom, then I was a single mom, the story just kept coming and coming and coming, and I did nothing with it. And I said, I should probably write this book. Literally, one day I was cleaning my house, and the story started flowing in color, and the characters' names that never existed started coming, and where she grew up and what was happening. And I went into the shower, turned it on, and it was like the story just flowed right through me in the shower. And I said, I got to get my computer and I got to start. And that was the beginning of it, that it just flowed out of me. And I haven't stopped writing about this series. And it is near and dear to me because I do talk about the club scene in New York, very big. What band was going to be at what club? It was on the radio stations, and it was a big deal. Fortunately for me, I started dating a guy who was a roadie for the biggest band on the circuit. I mean, they were the top. So I got to know those guys, and they were my friends. I go see them play. My name was at the door. I was 16. I wasn't 18 yet, but it didn't matter. I just got involved in that club scene. And then eventually I started dating a guy from another band who was a bass player. And that was kind of a serious relationship. I kept extending the friendship circle with all these different bands because, you see them, they see you. On a weekend, they would put, like my boyfriend's band was always double billed with Twisted Sister, who was the only band that came out of this whole New York scene. My friends from that first band, they were unbelievable musicians. The guitar player had met Jimmy Page and they kind of jammed together. So they were very serious and very good at what they did. But the record people want you to have your own music. And that's always the thing. You could be the best cover band in the world, but you have to back it up with original music. So that was one thing. And then, there would be a guy that would come in and he would have a little money, or he would pretend that he was a wise guy and is like, I'll take care of you. I'll get you studio time, which back in the 70s, 80s was very hard to get. Like, you may have gotten 2 o'clock in the morning because that's the only thing that was open. They would do all this stuff and then they would let go a member of the band or two members of the band. And it's like, well, wait, now you just changed the band. It's not the band that you wanted in the studio. Now you're changing it. And I saw that happen a lot. And what ends up happening is that it goes defunct. the band breaks up. It doesn't happen. Maybe they have one song that they could put a demo, but then it goes nowhere because it's not the same thing. So there was that. There was drugs. There was groupies. Even in the club scene level, all that stuff was there. I was fortunate enough to know somebody who was a promotional manager for Mercury Records. So my girlfriend and I got to do fun stuff backstage, whatever. And this particular friend, her brother was in a rock band in London. And I know you're going to know this. So back in the day, it was Don Kirshner's rock concert or Midnight Special, right?
Yeah, I went to a taping of that.
And right. So we found out that her brother in London was going to sing his song. And so we're all around the TV waiting for this to happen. So they sang their song. And their song was, I Love Rock and Roll, Put Another Dime in the Jukebox. That was their song originally. So I guess when the band broke up and he moved back, I went to his 30th birthday party, which was star-studded. I was sitting next to Steve Rebell, and I didn't know it was him. And he said to me, "Oh, so you coming to my club later?" And I looked at him and said, "What club? What club do you have?" And he goes, Studio 54. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, yeah, sure. Yeah, why not go?" And then he managed Joan Jett. And so she made his song famous. I remember being in the supermarket with my daughters and it came on, the music. And I was singing it. I was like, wait, why do I know this song? What's going on? And then I connected it and I said, wait, why is she singing this song? And then I later found out it's because he managed her and gave her that song. So, I have funny little stories like that. And
Yeah, so we should say that your books are rock and roll themed. Is the first
right.
one Playing Hard? Is that the first book?
Yeah, yes. My editor came up with these great names, and I will say my books do have it is a romance story. It is the romance of the two main characters. We go through the gritty, horrible club band scene, and then what it takes for you to get to the next level. And you can be grinding it out for years before, back in the day when a record guy would come see you play and say, we'd like to make a demo with you. And that's the way it worked back then. But I do go over a 20-year period of time. So in that 20 years, I take into consideration, yes, all of that. And remember, record companies own you. They were like, okay, we want 5 albums out of you. And then after the album, you need to tour. And then you come back and you do another album. And they do go through that. And then MTV starts. MTV made a lot of people famous really quickly because as long as your video was played and sometimes played every hour, you were going to be successful. And then I go into the streaming, and now bands, for the most part, they all have their own studios. They crank out their own music. They piecemeal it out, which is fine. I get it. So I go through the changes in the music industry and how that affects the band, how the love story does get tested because I do put in the part of people getting addicted. That was a real thing, and it still is a real thing, whether it's alcohol or cocaine or whatever it is that they like.
Yeah, sex, drugs, rock and roll.
It's really I did the Brooklyn Book Festival, and I had to go to the ladies' room, and my youngest daughter's sitting there, and somebody said, "What's the book's about?" And she goes, "Drugs, sex, and rock and roll." And the person said, "Oh, great, I'll buy it." And I came back, and she said, "I just sold one of your books." And I said, "Well, what'd you say?" And she said, "I just said drugs, sex, and rock and roll, Mom. That's it." And I was like, "Okay, I mean that works." Because it really was that way, and it still is that way. I mean, let's be real, it still is that way.
Sure, sure.
Um,
That's part of the allure. Do you remember the movie? I think it came out in 2000 or 2001. It was called Rock Star with Mark Wahlberg and Jennifer Aniston, in that movie, it just shows if you're not familiar with that lifestyle, that was I thought a pretty good portrayal of a band that was they'd been around a while. They were very popular. The lead singer was getting older. They had a little bit of a blow up and he left and they just went out and got a younger guy that could sing just like him. It's almost like Journey, you
I was
know.
just gonna say that.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
like
Where
Journey.
yeah. Steve Perry couldn't sing anymore, so they got a
Yeah.
new guy out of the Philippines and sounds just like Steve Perry, and they've been going for the last 10 years or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's
And
it's been a fascinating part of my growing up. I liked music from probably the time I bought my first album was Meet the Beatles in 1964, 8 years old,
we had
and
it. Yes,
from that
yeah.
moment on, I've just been a big rock and roll music fan and just really have enjoyed
Yeah.
it. I felt like I lived through the best years of music. I really feel that way.
I 100% agree with you because I wanted my daughters to have that. So from a young age, I always say the Beatles don't even, they're not in the conversation because they're the ones who started everything. So we don't even, they're on a pedestal
Yep.
and I believe that they belong there.
Yep.
And I introduced them Beatles, Stones, Van Halen, and Genesis, and they would be like, "This is Genesis with Peter Gabriel, and this is Genesis with Phil." And they knew that from, this is the Police, this is Sting without the Police, and I was just constantly feeding them music. I think they appreciated it. So yeah, going to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, going to see STP. I tried to do all that. I took them to see Cyndi Lauper for the 25th anniversary of True Colors. I mean, just things that spoke to me. They were like, "Great, let's go." And I think the last concert I saw, and the Jones Beach venue is fantastic. And my daughter said, "Mom, Peter Gabriel and Sting are doing a concert together. We got to go." And I said, "No, we do. We got to go." And I think the tickets, and they weren't the best seats, but they weren't the worst. And it was $125. And my mother was in town. And I said, "Okay, that's your Mother's Day gift. Whether you like it or not, you're going to this concert." That was the last concert I saw because my daughter was just like, "We've got to go see them." I feel like I really gave them the knowledge and sometimes we're driving in the car and one of the girls puts on their playlist. My youngest daughter had Van Morrison, The Kinks, and I was like, "Kara, good for you." I said, "I'm impressed that you have those people on your playlist." And it was shocking. And she goes, "No, I really like that song." And I said, "Of course you do." Because I put it out there for them. And I think
Well,
that's the greatest gift to give your kids is a gift of music.
I agree. Yeah, and my three kids, I mean, they love the music of our generation. My son's first concert was Michael Jackson, and my second son's first concert was ZZ Top with Los Lobos, and my
Yeah.
daughter's first concert was Billy Joel. So, and they all like the music of the era
Yeah.
of my wife and I. That's the music that they like.
I do like some of the pop music.
Yeah, you
I
mentioned you like
do
Taylor Swift.
I do like Taylor Swift.
Hmm.
She's been doing it since she was like 15, 16 years old. So you got to give her credit on that. I mean, and she writes her own music,
She's been big for a
props
long
her.
time. She's just blown up the last couple of years. But my daughter saw her first time probably 8 or 10 years ago, and then my daughter just saw her on this last tour, and they didn't have great seats, but they were there. So
It's funny that where my daughters have landed in music, yes, they'll be like, "Okay, mom, put on your playlist." And they know everything. But my youngest daughter likes electronica. She goes to the clubs in New York City and that's what they play. But again, like she had Van Morrison and the Kinks on her playlist, so I can't. My middle daughter, I'll never forget. She was into Adele before Adele took off. I went into her room and she's listening, and I'm listening to this music, and I said, Oh my God. I said, is this for girls who have their periods and broke up with their boyfriends? And she's like, oh my God, Mom. And I said, this is like really sad stuff here. Go forward a year and I'm listening to Adele and she just stared at me and she goes, what about Adele? And I said, okay, yeah, you got me. And my oldest daughter, the one, Horn, Nirvana. I mean, she was sure when Kurt Cobain died, she was sure that Courtney Love killed him, and she was crying, like, I know she killed him. And I'm like, okay, okay, not so serious. Even country music now is not really, we think of the country western like Tammy Wynette and all those people, but it's morphed into a little bit of rock. And yes, some of it has a little bit of country vibe, but these guys aren't dumb. They've kind of like segued in the rock world. And some rock people like Aaron Lewis of Stain stopped doing music for Stain and became a country singer. And now he's back with Stain because they're touring again. It just shows you, right? Because
Yeah.
they know that's what the people want.
Yeah, for sure. And one of my biggest guys that I followed and saw 13 times was Jimmy Buffett. And so he was kind of a crossover mix between country and rock, so, or what we
Yeah,
call Southern rock or country rock or whatever you want to call it. But people like,
exactly.
Kenny Chesney or Zach Brown.
Jack
Uh,
Brown, yes,
yeah,
is a good
those are
example.
people that, and Jimmy grew up right there in Alabama. He grew up in Mobile and Fairhope.
Fairhope is a beautiful place, I
Yeah,
have to tell you.
yeah.
I'd move there in a minute.
Well, listen, hey, Beth, so if people want to find your books, what is the easiest way for them to do that?
It's on Amazon. You could get it on Kindle Unlimited if you have a Kindle account. And of course, we have it on paperback. You could go to my website and which is perfectionsaga.com.
And I'll put that in the
And
show
you,
notes too.
yeah, and it will be linked to by the book. I did do book festivals, and now I'm kind of segueing into, and I never knew this existed, but there are things called romance conventions, and think of Comic-Con, right? My
Yeah,
daughter used
right.
to go to Comic-Con. It's for women who just read romance books, and there's conventions and they're all over the country. I've got into two and there's like two or three more, and it's very hard. They book them like a year in advance, and I'm like, put me on the wait list, I want to go. If people are going to read your book and people want to ask you questions or people want to know, you need to be attentive to that. I will say this, and I've said it on other podcasts, that I would love for it to be made a series, but I will, because I'm self-published, I own everything. I told my editor, if this is ever made into a series, you and I are going to write the screenplay. I said they can throw their person in, but nobody knows the books better than us, and I don't want them to change a thing. That happens, and that happens
Sure.
with stories. I'm thinking of all the different things that could happen. I would love it to happen, but time will tell. Just saying to your audience out there, buy my books. They're fun, they're spicy, so expect to have a little bit of drug, sex, and rock and roll in the books. I'm true to the era and I move it forward. Like I said, it is a romance, so yeah, there's going to be some things. And that was kind of difficult for when my girls read the book, for them to read those scenes. I was like, why don't you skip over that? And they're like, where is she coming up with this stuff?
You can tell them that was a fictional part.
Oh, I know. I always say, oh, come on. I said, it's fiction.
Yeah. Well, right on, Beth. Well, hey, it's been fun. It's been fun talking and reminiscing about
Yeah,
music and hearing what you're doing in your life right now. And so, yeah, I'll put all the information about the books and where, the listeners can find them. I'll put those in the show notes.
I
But I sure
appreciate it.
appreciate you coming on today and taking some time and telling your story today.
Yeah, I love to tell my story, and I will come back. The third book is going to be out early this year sometime. I got to get it to my editor.
All right. Well, hey, there's something for the listeners to look forward to. They start off with Playing Hard, though. That's the first one. So, once again, Beth, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. I really appreciate it.
All right, listeners. Well, hey, listen, I don't ask this very often, but I'm going to ask you right now. If you are listening on Apple, rate and review the podcast. This is how the podcast can grow a little bit when, we're all human, right? We look for things that have 5 stars or a lot of reviews. And so, yeah, I appreciate it if you guys take the time to do that. And as always, just check back in 2 weeks as we're going to have another really interesting life story here on Nobody Knows Your Story. Aloha, Beth.
Mahalo.
Down a little country road not far away, let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Let's talk story.
Sit down and relax, stay a little while. It's been so long since I've seen your smile. Well, a little of this and a little of that. Funny how time just slips away.
Cuz, we gonna talk story.
Eh? Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Woo! Time for friends to share. Time to hear what's